Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do something that I find very exciting. I have been doing it for a couple of years now, looking at the New York Times' 100 notable books of the year. They released the list this morning as I am filming this video. I will have a link to the full list in the description box down below if you'd like to access it that way. I think it will be fun talking about this, and I will also have to add a PSA because people tend to get very upset. Even when I did a video last week about the Washington Post's top 10 books of 2024, which I will link down below, I mentioned this, but I still got a comment from somebody saying, how dare you review books that you haven't read? I am not attempting to review these books at all, in any way, shape, or form. I can talk confidently about the books that I have read. For anything else, I'm really going to be talking about feedback I've heard from other people and really just whether or not I myself am interested in reading a book. And whether or not I'm interested in reading a book is different from whether or not you will be interested in reading a book. So that's fine. I'm not trying to review anything. We're just talking about interest. We'll speculate a little bit about what might be on the New York Times Book Review's top 10 books of 2024, which should be coming very quickly because it usually comes not long after the 100 notable list is released, and the 10 books are usually on the list. Before we begin, I do also want to say that I have very complicated feelings about the New York Times and the Washington Post right now because I don't really like the coverage that they have done recently. The New York Times in particular, I don't like the way they handled the election. I don't like the way they hand out op-eds to reactionary people who are spreading bad faith ideas, bad faith arguments, and just lies and a lot of bad things. They keep putting a lot of bad things into the world. They have also had terrible coverage for transgender people and things like that. So I'm in a very complicated place with the Washington Post and the New York Times right now. I have decided to do this video because I know I still enjoy going through the list. I know a lot of other people are interested in this every year. So we're going to do it, but I have complicated feelings. And if my opinion of the New York Times does not improve, I will be rethinking my subscription. Right now, I'm kind of holding on for the book review, which has been doing very good and interesting things lately. But if it doesn't get better, next year, I might cancel my subscription and maybe not even do this video next year at all. We'll see how that goes. But just wanted to throw that out there before we get into the actual list. I should also note that you probably won't see every book that is going to be on this list because I might talk about them while I film. And then if I need to cut this video a little bit shorter so it's not overly long, I might cut some of those books out. And you'll have to go to the actual website for the full list, but I'll cover as many as I can while keeping this video as short as I can. Before we jump in, I pulled a couple of books that I am sort of predicting we will see. I have done something very different this year in that I have not even glanced through this list. So you'll be getting my actual reactions to these books as we go through. But here are some books that I expect to see on it. Let's just start with the obvious one, James by Percival Everett, which just won the National Book Award for fiction and was one of the Washington Post's 10 best books of the year. Both of those videos I did about that, those topics will be down below. I will be shocked if this isn't on the list. Martyr by Kaveh Akbar, I think will definitely be there. Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange, I think will definitely be there. Those I feel like are the sure things. I'm also going to throw in a book I don't own a copy of, Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle. I feel like the New York Times Book Review has been head over heels in love with that book this year. So I will be shocked if it's not on the 100 notable, and I will be shocked if it's not in the top 10. Here are some other books that I think we might see. I don't have Knife by Salman Rushdie, but I think that will be on the list somewhere because this is fiction and nonfiction. Fire Exit by Morgan Talty. I would love to see that on the list. I haven't read this one yet, but Long Island by Colm Toveen feels like it's been getting great reviews. The Safe Keep by Yael van der Wouden. I think it will make an appearance here. I don't think it would make the top 10 for the year, but with a 100 notable, this was on the list for the Booker Prize, and I will have a link to my reaction to the Booker Prize down below. I feel like it's going to be in here somewhere. And then something I would really like to see, but I'm not sure would be here, is Hombrecito by Santiago Jose Sanchez. This is a wonderful, wonderful debut book, and I hope more people discover it, so I would be very happy to see it on this list. For two nonfiction books, I think it would be fun to see Radiant, The Life and Line of Keith Haring by Brad Gooch. I read that. It's a lot of fun. And The Friday Afternoon Club by Griffin Dunn. I feel like that would be another fun one to see on this list. A book I just finished, and I am hoping that more people will discover it, Salamlik by Khaled Al-Ismail, translated by Larry Price. I just think this is a book that more people should discover, so I would love to see it on the list. And why not? Greta and Valden by Rebecca K. Riley, a book that has been on my to-read list all year, and I still haven't gotten around to it. So those are things I expect to see. Let's get into the actual list and see what we find there. Okay, here we are at the beginning, a very good place to start. The 100 Notable Books of 2024. Oh, so when they did the 100 Best Books of the last 25 years, which I will link down below, or the best books of the 21st century so far, which we linked down below, they had a feature where you could check off the books that you have read. It looks like they're doing that again here. So we can see how many of these I've read by the end, and that'll be kind of fun to follow along with as well. All right, here we go. The first book, All Fours by Miranda July. I have not read that. I don't think I'm really interested in reading it. I read a Miranda July short story collection, and I think I got one or two stories into it. I had had it forever, and then earlier this year, I finally sat down and said, I'm going to try this book and see if I am into it, and I was not into it. So I think Miranda July is definitely someone who has an audience, and I am not part of that. So if you are interested in All Fours, go forth and enjoy it. This is one I am happy to let other people enjoy, and I will sit that one out. Moving along, we have Beautyland by Marie-Helene Bertino. I had been thinking that I would be more likely to read Marie-Helene Bertino's previous book, which I think was called Parrot, something like that. So this is another one where I have not read it, and I'm not going to check I want to read it. I think I would go back and read her previous book before I would read this. We have Black River by Nilanjana Roy. I am completely unfamiliar with this book. This brilliant, brutal, and utterly affecting novel about the murder of an 8-year-old child in rural India uses the trappings of the mystery to examine deeper ills in the entire country. I had never heard of this book before. Just that little blurb sounds fascinating, so I'm actually going to check I want to read it on that one. And then when I'm done with this list, I can loop back and look a little further into this one, maybe see some reviews. If you've read Black River, let me know what you thought of it. But that definitely caught my attention. I love that they also have these little subcategories, like Beautyland is listed as speculative fiction. I tend not to read or get along with speculative fiction. I don't read a lot of mysteries or noirs, but that cultural framing sounds really interesting for that one. We have Poetry, Bluff by Danez Smith. I have not read it. I don't read a whole lot of poetry, being honest. I have heard great things about Danez Smith's previous collection of poetry. I am blanking on the name of it. I want to say it was Homey. So I feel like, again, I would go back and I would read that one before I would read this. And I'm not going to check I want to read it because poetry is something I don't read a lot of. So we'll leave it alone. Next, we have The Book of Love by Kelly Link. I decided to leave this one alone, although I've heard a lot of people enjoy it. I've heard a lot of people enjoy Kelly Link's previous works. She was a Pulitzer Prize finalist. This is kind of like Marie-Helene Bertino. I feel like I would go back and read her stories. I think this was her first novel, and I would go back and I would do those before I would do The Book of Love. But you know, and it's a big book. It's a fantasy epic, so I feel like it's a steep hill to climb to convince me to read it. But if you are interested, more power to you. I've heard very good things about the book. I think I would just personally catch up on a lot of other things before I would read The Book of Love. That's all. Now we have The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman. I have never read a Lev Grossman book. It says for fans of Wolf Hall, which really intrigues me, but I am not convinced. I am a bit hit or miss when it comes to fantasy books. So I think I would leave this one alone. But, you know, I think it's good to stretch your boundaries, push the boat out a little bit, read outside of your comfort zone every once in a while. So any of these books, like the Kelly Link one that is a really big fantasy epic, or The Bright Sword, which is described as an Arthurian fantasy, if you think that I should reconsider, let me know in the comments section down below, especially if you're someone who follows along and knows my reading taste. Let me know if you think I should reconsider any of those, because, this is not a video for me to dunk on a list of books and say, I'm not interested in that. I'm not Madeline Kahn in History of the World Part 1 going, no, 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 yes. I'm here to look at what has been popular, and I love having opportunities to reconsider what I might read and what I might be interested in. So help me do that. Continuing on, we have The Coin by Yasmin Zahar. I have not heard of this book at all, so let's read the description. The narrator of this smart and sneering novel of capital and its consequences is an unnamed Palestinian schoolteacher in New York City who becomes involved in a scheme to buy Hermes Birkin bags and scalp them to trashy and unworthy buyers. In a spiraling hallucinogenic plot, the narrator seesaws between jaded American consumerism, ignore my calendar, and the sadness and guilt of displacement. That sounds interesting. I don't think I immediately gravitate toward it in the same way that I did the previous book that I marked as I want to read it. So I think if you have feedback on it, let me know. The main thing that's making me hold off is the for fans of. I didn't really like The Girls by Emma Cline. I haven't read The Guest, and I have not gotten along with Ottessa Moshfegh at all. So that's actually what's also holding me back. But again, let me know if you think I should reconsider in the comment section down below. Moving along, we have Colored Television by Danzy Senna, which was just included in the Washington Post's top 10 books of 2024. That is something I am interested in reading. I have not yet, so I am going to mark it as I want to read it. And it is interesting that it says for fans of Erasure by Percival Everett, because Percival Everett is Danzy Senna's husband. And I talked about that in the Washington Post video. So that is definitely something that I would be interested in reading, although I have not yet. I haven't hit anything I've read yet. Let's see how far we have to go before we get there. Next, we have Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner. This was on the list for the Booker and the National Book Award, and I have decided to sit that one out as well. So again, if you would like to convince me to change my mind, let me know, but I have just heard too much inconsistent feedback about Creation Lake, to the point where if I'm going to read a Rachel Kushner book, I would go back and I would read Telex from Cuba or The Flamethrowers or one of her previous books that has been much more consistently loved by people. Creation Lake feels like something that's a bit more cilantro. People either love it or they just can't stomach the taste of it. So I feel pretty comfortable leaving that one alone. But again, if you've enjoyed it and you think I should reconsider, let me know in the comment section down below. And we'll just keep going to The Impusium by Olga Tokarczuk. I have still not read an Olga Tokarczuk book. And similar to some other ones, I feel like I would go back and read Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead instead of this one. So I would hold off. I'm not even going to add it to my want to read list. And we're going to keep going. All right, we're scrolling past an ad here. The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I've not read a Leigh Bardugo book. From everything I've heard, I'm not convinced that she would be an author for me. So if you know me and you want to change my mind, let me know. Another one I feel pretty comfortable passing over. And that seems to be a theme. I'm a little surprised that we've gotten this far in. I have not been keeping track of how many books how far we've gotten into this list, but I have not read any, and I've only marked 2 as want to read so far. So really interesting results for this. And then we have Funny Story by Emily Henry. I have really been enjoying romance books, all the cinnamon bun energy this year, and I think I will need a lot more cinnamon bun energy over the next 4 years, if you know what I mean. Help me cope, help me survive and get through the everyday. And Emily Henry is a rom-com author I have consistently heard good things about. So I am going to mark this one as I want to read it. So there you go. We have at least one more book that I want to read. Ghost Roots by Pemi Oguta was on the shortlist for the National Book Award for Fiction. I am interested in it. I still think that I would probably prioritize some other books that I haven't caught up to for this year before I would get to it. But because I am interested in it, I am going to click I want to read it. Because I've heard some pretty good things about it. Now we have The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. I've not read it, and I haven't read Liz Moore's previous book, which was wildly beloved, and I'm blanking on the name of it. It's like Black River or something like that. Joel read it and wasn't too much of a fan of it. So I have been feeling like I feel okay sitting out The God of the Woods, but I know a lot of people who follow my channel have read it and enjoyed it. So maybe at some point I would consider reading The God of the Woods. But again, I feel like even just on this pile, there are books that I would rather read first and catch up to before I would attempt The God of the Woods. So I'm not even going to mark this one as want to read it. I'm just going to keep going. Godwin by Joseph O'Neill is next. I'm actually excited to see this here because I am a huge fan of Netherland. I read it a second time when I went to college because I wanted to write a paper about it. That's how much I liked that book. I've never read another book by Joseph O'Neill, and Godwin sounds fascinating. It's a sporty book, and I'm not a very sporty person, but Netherland is about cricket and managed to be a book that I found so fascinating that, as I said, I read it a second time in college just so I could write a paper about it. So if anybody can get me into a book that involves the world of sport, it's probably Joseph O'Neill. So I need to catch up to that book. Like, I would definitely read Godwin before I would try The God of the Woods. So this is one that I'm marking as I want to read it. I actually have a copy of it and I just haven't gotten around to it yet. Good Material by Dolly Alderton. I've heard enough good things about this one that I'm going to mark it as want to read, but I have not read it yet. How far are we going to have to go before I find a book I have read? Pretty far, because I haven't read Great Expectations by Vincent Cunningham, and that is definitely something I wanted to read. My library did not have a copy. An audio copy never showed up on any of my subscription services. And after the book was released, I really didn't hear much about it. So to be honest with you, it kind of fell off of my radar. And that's another reason I love looking at these lists. It reminds me of books that I wanted to get to. And, I had been hoping that maybe I wouldn't have to purchase a copy of Great Expectations if my library purchased a copy or anything like that. But maybe at this point, it's probably not far off from being released in paperback. So that is definitely something that I would really like to catch up to. And again, not to be mean to Liz Moore, but this is that I would definitely do Good Material or Great Expectations before I would do God of the Woods. I don't mean to be mean, but I'm being mean, I feel like. So I feel like I'm trapped in this vicious cycle. Let's just keep going. Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle. I got one in my prediction and I have read it. So I get to mark one for that. We finally got to a book that I have read, and it was on the long list for the Booker Prize. As I said, the New York Times Book Review has been head over heels for this book, and I fully expect to see it on their top 10 books of the year when that is released. They did a book club episode about this, and I read it, and I thought it was kind of fine. I think in about a year's time, I won't really remember Headshot. A lot of the details will have gone away from me. And it is an interesting book. What it intends to do is interesting. I just don't feel like it had much of an impact on me. But clearly that is not the case for everyone because the jury for the Booker Prize put it on their long list. The New York Times Book Review has been raving about it all year since it was released. And here it is on their 100 Notable. And again, I fully expect to see this in their top 10. And here we get The Hunter by Tana French. I have not read Tana French, and I feel like I have gotten a bunch of recommendations from people about where to start with her books. And The Hunter is not frequently cited as that. So I would do other Tana French books before I would get to this one. At some point, she is an author that I would like to try reading, but I haven't yet. Then there's Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. That is another one I feel very comfortable sitting out on the discourse around Intermezzo because I read Conversations with Friends, which was Sally Rooney's first book, I believe, and I didn't enjoy the book, but I took notes the whole way through because the work that she was doing behind the scenes was fascinating. By the way, there's a snoring dog on the floor behind me, so if you hear snoring or like a rumbling, it's Teddy, my dog. After conversations with friends, I feel like I appreciate Sally Rooney as a writer because I think she did a lot of really interesting things to put together that novel. But I just didn't really like the book. And I feel like I don't think I'm the target audience for her work. And I might someday read Normal People. I think if I were going to pick up a Sally Rooney book, that is probably the next one that I would try. So I feel pretty comfortable leaving that one alone at the end of the day. Here we go. James by Percival Everett. I get to mark another one as something that I have read. And again, totally not surprised to see it here. It was one of my predictions. And I think it is, I think I even called it the surest bet of any book to be on this list. And there it is. And I have been on a journey with it. When I first read James, I was a little put off by the ending, but the more I've sat with the book, the more I have deeply appreciated it and come to want to see it succeed. I fully expect that it will be in the New York Times Book Review's top 10 books when we get around to that announcement. And if you haven't read it, consider reading it. I attempted to read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn before I read James, and I wasn't enjoying it. And people started telling me it's not actually a requirement. You don't have to have. So I read James on its own, and then I did look at like the Wikipedia page for The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, because I did find that useful because it helped me see a lot of the ways that the structure of James echoes and departs from that book. So I don't think you need to read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but it was useful for me to at least be familiar with the structure of that book. Again, I did it through the Wikipedia page, but a lot of people have read Huckleberry Finn first. Oh, we get to a book that I DNF'd. Now, since I DNF'd it, I'm going to mark it as something that I have read. I had really high hopes for Long Island Compromise, but I have this really strong aversion to books that are about privileged and entitled, especially white men who can't get their lives together. You know, I'm a white man who can't get my life together or is still trying to do that. I just feel like I'm joking about myself, but I feel like it's the type of novel, the type of story that we have just heard so many times. And Taffy Brodesser Akner's previous book, Fleischman is in Trouble, is also a book about a white man who really can't get his life together. And people kept telling me, well, you should read it because the last part of the book is a subversion on that type of story. And I just didn't really feel like reading the book. So I decided Long Island Compromise would sort of be my entry point to test the waters on Taffy Brodesser Akner. And I'm sure the end of Long Island Compromise does something similar, but for the part of the book that I read, and I can't remember exactly how far I got into it, I really liked the first chapter, which sets up the premise of the story. I thought that was great, and I was really interested in it. And then it jumps closer to the present day and takes the perspective of one of the sons. He has a nickname. I think it's Boomer or something like that. I couldn't stand him. And you're not supposed to stand him, but the book just stayed in his voice for so long that I just didn't care anymore. And that's me. I am not the only person who has struggled with Long Island Compromise, but it's gotten enough good feedback that, you know, take what I say with a grain of salt. You might really enjoy Long Island Compromise, especially if you're someone who liked Fleischman of What Is in Trouble. And a lot of people did like Fleischman is in Trouble. So I'm marking it as something I've read since I did make an effort, but I did not finish the book. And now we have Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. I definitely expected to see that one. It is definitely something that I want to read, but I have not gotten around to yet. If there's only one book that I feel like I should catch up to before the end of the year, it would probably be Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. So we'll see if I actually manage to fit that in because we're running out of time. But it's something I would really like to read. I've heard a lot of good things about it. I've heard some mixed things about it, but I'm interested enough that I just want to read it and give it a try for myself. Now we have The Mighty Red by Louise Erdrich. I should have known that this was going to be on the list. It is definitely something that I want to read, so I'm going to mark it as such. I have purchased copies of every book that Louise Erdrich has published, and at some point, I think I would like to read them. I've been on something of a mixed journey with her more recent work. I think Plague of Doves is wonderful. Love Medicine, her first novel, wonderful. Roundhouse is good. I didn't really like La Rose. I didn't really like The Night Watchman, which is the book that I thought The Night Watchman was uneven. And I wasn't a big fan of The Sentence. So I'm a little all over the place, but I think she's such an interesting writer that I always want to see what she has to say. So The Mighty Raid is something I would really like to catch up to as well. The Mysterious Case of the Alperton Angels by Janice Hallett. I feel like at some point during the year I have heard something good about this, but I don't read a whole lot of mystery novels. If you want to change my mind, let me know in the comment section down below. But I feel pretty comfortable leaving this one alone and seeking out other books that are on the list. And now we have Neighbors and Other Stories by Diane Oliver. I read it. I was so happy that I did read it. It's a posthumous collection by a writer who died at 22, and she died a long time ago. She died in the 1960s. And the purpose of publishing all of her stories together was to help her earn her place as a renowned Black author from the 1960s. And I think the stories are great. She's clearly, or was clearly, a very talented writer. The shame is, usually when you read a story collection, they feel thematically linked. And because these weren't really intended to be published together, they feel sort of disparate. The tone can be a little different. The setup can be a little different. Some feel very grounded in realism. Some feel a little bit more out there. So it doesn't entirely feel like a cohesive collection, but as a look into the work of someone who died too young, it is fascinating. So I'm pretty happy to see it here. Then we have Our Evenings by Alan Hollinghurst, which I have not read yet, but I want to. I have been on a bit of a journey with Alan Hollinghurst as well. I struggled a little bit with The Line of Beauty, but I ultimately liked that book a great deal. I DNF'd The Sparsholt Affair, so I feel like I should try again. And Our Evenings sounds like a really interesting book. Moving along, we have The Pairing by Casey McQuiston, which I have read and which I really enjoyed. So genre books, especially romance, don't tend to get a whole lot of respect. So I'm actually very happy to see this one here. I had been very resistant to reading The Pairing because the premise is that you have Theo and Kit. They were dating, and then they broke up. They had purchased tickets to do a food tour of Europe. And after they broke up, neither one of them went on the tour, and they keep delaying and delaying and delaying. And now it's like the last opportunity that they have to use the voucher that they got for canceling their trip before it just expires. But they both decide to use it on this last opportunity, so they end up in each other's company. And in the way the book is marketed is that in order to prove how okay they are hanging out with each other, they start a competition to see who can sleep with more people as they travel around. And they're both bisexual. So like kind of mayhem sort of ensues. So it sounds kind of gross and frat boy-ish. And I didn't think I would be into that. But it actually is handled in a very nuanced and interesting way. And I thought the exploration of Theo as a non-binary character was very interesting as well. So I really enjoyed that book, and I'm happy to see that it showed up here. Makes me hope that we will also see Abby Jimenez here for Just for the Summer, but we'll see. Maybe I shouldn't get greedy. We'll see. Piglet by Lottie Hazel. I've heard some mixed things about this book, so I'm going to say again, if you want to convince me that I should read it, let me know in the comment section, but I'm going to keep scrolling to the next one, which is The Practice, The Horizon, and The Chain by Sophia Samatar. I have not heard of this book at all. It's science fiction, which I tend not to read a lot of. So I'm just going to say, if you have feedback about this book, let me know in the comment section down below. And Praiseworthy by Alexis Wright. I have heard so many good things about this book. It is a brick. It's like a big book, if I'm remembering accurately. I am curious, so I'm going to mark it as something that I want to read for sure. And at some point, I don't know when, because I don't think I have a sense of urgency to get to Praiseworthy, but at some point I would probably try. Reboot by Justin Taylor. I don't even know what that book is. This satire of modern media and pop culture follows a former child actor who is trying to revive the TV show that made him famous. Taylor delves into the worlds of online fandom while exploring the inner life of a man seeking redemption and something meaningful to do. That sounds like something that could be interesting, but it could also fall into that trope of things that I don't really like, where it's just kind of about a man who can't get his life together. So I'm going to throw it to you. If you've read Reboot by Justin Taylor, let me know what you thought of it in the comment section down below, because I think it sounds interesting, but I'm not convinced at the moment. Next book, Rejection by Tony Tula Temute. This was on the long list for the National Book Award. I do want to read it. I actually got it from the library and was at a point where I was just really stressed in the lead up to the election. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to return it to the library and I will come back to it. So at some point, I would like to read it. I let it pass by me once, but I will hopefully be getting back to it at some point. And now we have The Safekeep by Jelle van der Wouden. I am happy to say that I kind of predicted that it would show up here. The tricky thing about The Safekeep is it's difficult to talk about without spoiling. And I think your reaction to The Safekeep really depends on how well you get through the first half, which does feel very familiar and perhaps a little too familiar, a little too cliched. And if you can get past that, how interesting you find the second half of the book, which does, a lot of people have pointed out, it relies on a sort of ham-fisted plot device to make that second half happen. And it does. So if you can overcome the sort of overly familiar first half, if you can overcome the plot device that gets you to the second half of the book and the sort of twist in it, and if you find that twist interesting enough, like I did, you will enjoy The Safekeep. Like, I'm very glad that The Safekeep has been out there and more people have been discovering the book and all of that. But it's a very interesting book to talk about, if nothing else. It won't be for everyone, but I think it's a very interesting book to talk about. So I'm happy to continue seeing it get out there for more people. Shred Sisters by Betsy Lerner. I have not heard of that one. This coming-of-age novel, overcast with the inconsistent cloud of mental illness, maps the effect of a daughter's volatility on her parents and younger sister and probes what exactly it means for love to be unconditional. For fans of My Sister the Serial Killer and The Most Fun We Ever Had. I actually want to read The Most Fun We Ever Had, and I really liked My Sister the Serial Killer, and I find that description interesting. So I'm going to mark that as something that I want to read. And again, after I'm done filming, I might go seek out some reviews. And if you've read it, let me know what you thought of it in the comment section down below, because I could be convinced. Moving along, we have The Silence of the Choir. I am completely unfamiliar with this. 72 migrants settle in a small Sicilian town in this polyphonic novel translated into English by Alison Anderson. Sarr, who won the Prix Goncourt, France's most prestigious literary prize in 2021, not only follows the newcomers, but also considers the inner lives of the villagers whose reactions vary considerably. Never heard of it, but that sounds fascinating. So I'm going to mark it as something that I want to read, and then I'll circle back and look for more reviews and more details about the book. And again, if you read it, let me know, because it sounds really interesting. Smoke Kings by Jamal Mayfield. I have not heard of that one. And in the interest of time, wait, can there ever be restitution for the harm done to generations of Black people in America? Mayfield takes the question to a provocative extreme in this thriller, which follows a group of 4 friends as they kidnap descendants of people who long ago committed racially motivated hate crimes. All right, that sounds interesting. I'm actually going to mark that as something I want to read. It caught my attention. And then I'm going to loop back and I'll find more information about the book in general. Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange is next. I kind of knew it would be there. Yeah, this is a follow-up to They're There, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. I have heard some mixed things to Wandering Stars, and I am still really looking forward to reading it and catching up to it, because I liked They're There a great deal. I thought that was a great Pulitzer Prize finalist, and I would love to get to it. So this is something that I want to read. Whale Fall by Elizabeth O'Connor. I actually have access to that on audio, and I haven't gotten around to it, but I want to read it, so I'm going to click that. What Does It Feel Like by Sophie Kinsella. Someone recently recommended Sophie Kinsella to me, but I'm seeing brain tumor, and that is a difficult topic for me, not only because I lost a dog to a brain tumor, but for other reasons this year that we won't go into. So I am having a sort of visceral, like, not right now. Not right now. Maybe at some point in the future. Maybe I would try a different Sophie Kinsella book, but we'll see. Then there's Wild Houses by Colin Barrett. This was on the long list for the Booker Prize, and I feel like people weren't underwhelmed. People weren't overwhelmed. They were just kind of whelmed by the presence of that book on the Booker long list. People just kind of said, it's fine. Don't really know why it's here. So I feel pretty comfortable leaving it alone. The Women by Kristen Hanna. I do want to read that one. Kristen Hanna actually came to Montana and did a big event in Helena with Montana Book Company. And I consistently hear good things about Kristen Hanna's books. I haven't read any of them. So at some point I would catch up. I know she wrote one about the Dust Bowl, and I'm blanking on the name of it, but I've heard really good things about that one, and I have heard very good things about The Women. So either one of those would probably be my starting point for her. You Dreamed of Empires by Alvaro Enrique, hallucinogenic historical fiction. I'm just going to keep scrolling, but if you're interested, pause and get the description. Queer sports romance, You Should Be So Lucky by Cat Sebastian. Joel read a book by Cat Sebastian this year and liked it. So it's about losing love and losing in baseball and finding unexpected love despite all your mistakes. The story cuts to the heart of what it means to be human, and also there's soup. I love soup. I'm going to mark that as something I want to read because I have heard good things about a different Cat Sebastian book. So I would do that. I would totally do that. And now we're getting into nonfiction. So let's see. We didn't get Fire Exit. We didn't get Long Island. We didn't get Hombrecito, Salamlik, or Greta and Valden. I got the others. Let this be a PSA. Those all sound like interesting books, so look them up as well. Now, when it comes to nonfiction, I feel like this is where, in particular, I'm going to skip a lot of books because I'm just not as familiar with nonfiction books as I am with fiction. I don't read as much nonfiction as I read fiction. So again, you may have to go to the actual list on the New York Times website to get the full list. I apologize, but it is the way it is. And a lot of this is to keep this video short and manageable for you. So here we go. The Achilles Trap by Steve Call. I have not read it. All the Worst Humans by Phil Elwood. I have not read it. I don't actually even know anything about that one. And for these, again, because I want to go a little faster, I am not really going to spend time on the descriptions. The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. Have not read it. Interesting that they label the category, The Kids Are Not All Right. Be Ready When the Luck Happens by Ina Garten. I have not read it. Ann Patchett has talked about this on the Parnassus Instagram page and said it was a really interesting book. So that is the most interested I have been in reading that book. But again, I feel like I would go in a lot of other directions before I would actually read that one. Challenger by Adam Higginbotham. That is about the Challenger explosion. I can't remember where I came across that book, but it sounded interesting. So I am going to mark that one as I want to read. It's something that happened when I was very young, too young to be aware of it in any meaningful way. And I listened to a podcast episode of You're Wrong about the Challenger explosion. So I would be curious to learn more about that. Chop, Fry, Watch, Learn, a food biography. I do like food biographies, but I'm going to come back and I will look at this one later to see if it's something that I would actually want to add to my want to read list. Scrolling past an ad, we have Film History, Cocktails with George and Martha by Philip Geffer. Rarely seen diary entries from the screenwriter who adapted Edward Albee's Broadway hit are a highlight of this unapologetically obsessive behind-the-scenes look at the classic film. I love that movie. I love that play. It's very difficult to watch, but I have enjoyed it. I don't know that I would read it, but because I find the topic interesting, I would definitely be curious to look into that one a little more closely, and I had never heard of it before. Cue the Sun by Emily Nussbaum. I follow Emily Nussbaum on Threads. She is very funny. I've heard that this is a very interesting exploration of reality TV. I don't know that I would want to read it, though. Phi or Fee by Alexandra Fuller. I would go back and I would read Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight first, because that was her first memoir, and so I would start there and then I would explore Alexandra Fuller's work more fully from there if I like it. The Hidden Globe. This was just included on the Washington Post's Best Books of 2024. It does sound interesting. I am a little worried that it would make me angry and stress me out, especially in the current political climate and with current events. So that might be something I would think about for the future. I'm not going to mark it as want to. You know what? I'll mark it as want to read because it is something that I'm curious about. I Heard Her Call My Name by Lucy Sante. That is something I want to read. It was included in the Washington Post's Best Books of 2024, and it immediately jumped out to me from that list. Biography of John Lewis by David Greenberg. I could be interested in reading that, so I'm just going to mark it as something I want to read. Knife by Salman Rushdie. I have not read it, and I want to, and I will point out that it was one of my predictions for this list, so, let me pat myself on the shoulder. Lovely One by Ketanji Brown Jackson. I'm interested. She did a really great interview with NPR when that book was released, and I would be interested in going back and listening to her story, but I don't want to do it right now. Politics, current events, the Supreme Court is all stressing me out. So I feel like I'm going to sit it out. Reagan, no, I don't want anything to do with that. I can tell you right now, The Rebels Clinic by Adam Schatz is one that I'm unfamiliar with. Oh, no, I've heard something about this one, but I feel like I would leave it alone. Soldiers and Kings by Jason DeLeon. I don't know it. Oh, no. That just won the National Book Award, and that sounded interesting. So I'm going to mark that as want to read. He gave a great speech, and I heard great things about it in my National Book Award reaction. So I just got so used to saying, I don't know it, that I blew past it. There's Always This Year by Hanif Abdurraqib. I have heard a lot of good things about this one. I still don't really feel convinced that I want to read it, though. So if you've read it, let me know in the comment section down below if I should change my mind, because it sounds interesting. I hear so much that is great about this author's writing. I feel like I would go back and read a different one of his books first. When the Clock Broke by John Gantz was just included in the Washington Post's 10 Best Books of the Year. And there I talked about how I think it's interesting. Without even having read it, I sort of quibble with the premise. And it's using the 1992 election and saying, this is the moment where we started getting into what the modern political landscape is. And I find that interesting as a focal point or a thesis for a book, because I think American history is a lot more complicated than that. I think you could definitely make a case that a lot of things that happened in 1992 are being echoed today or led to some of the things that have happened today. But I think you have to go a little bit further. Like you can't talk about Pat Buchanan as one of the people that talks about. You can't talk about him without talking about Reagan. Can't talk about Reagan without talking about Gerald Ford and how Reagan tried to run against Gerald Ford. Can't talk about Gerald Ford without talking about Nixon. Can't talk about Nixon without talking about JFK and the first televised debate, which also means you have to talk about Lyndon Johnson. And you can't really talk about any of them without talking about World War II and the way it shaped the country in the 1950s and the sort of reactionary politics, like the counter-revolution and everything that came with the hippies in the 1960s. And a lot of current politics is still a reaction to FDR and the New Deal and a lot of that stuff. Like people still complain about Medicare and Medicaid. So I'm interested in When the Clock Broke, but I'm not sure the answer is as simple as its premise. And then the last one is A Wilder Shore by Camille Perry. Again, I'm unfamiliar with it. So here we are at the end. I've only read 6: Headshot, James, Long Island Compromise, The Safekeep, The Pairing, and Neighbors, and I want to read 27. And I think I was right about Knife, but we did not get the Keith Haring book or the Griffin Dunn memoir, which is a little surprising because they had him on to talk on the Book Reviews podcast and they seemed to really like his book. But anyway, who knows? That is the New York Times' 100 Notable Books of 2024. I would love to hear what you think of this list. If you have recommendations for me based on any of these, let me know in the comment section down below. If there is something that you think is an omission, let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know what you think might make it onto the top 10 books of the year. That is kind of fun to speculate about as well. Knife, by the way, by Salman Rushdie is another one that I didn't say this when I talked about it, but I fully expect that will be one of the top 10 books of the year as well. So we'll keep looking out for the actual top 10 from the New York Times book reviews. Stay tuned for all that. Again, I'll have my list of the Washington Post's 10 best down below, and I will be doing a reaction to their 50 notable books of 2024, hopefully soon. Stay tuned for that. And as always, I really appreciate your time. I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.